Hey, Deserving listeners, let's continue following the Ruby Franke Jodi Hildebrandt story. Obviously, there's a trigger warning. There's a lot of details that are disclosed in these videos in the news story, and I will be discussing that, so make sure that you watch with care. Also, I want to remind everyone that if you don't know me, if you are just watching this video not knowing who I am, I've been a therapist and a professor for about 27 years-ish, and a good portion of my early career was being hired by the government in my state of Washington to go into the homes to try to help families that had parents who were allegedly or even criminally accused of abusing their children in a variety of ways, meaning physical, emotional, sexual. And I was there not only to treat the children, obviously, but also to try to reform the parents. And it was very stressful work, and it was heartbreaking. I did work with families with these sorts of allegations, so I thought I would offer my expertise and my experience in reaction to the news story.
Okay, let's go ahead and switch to parenting now, and let's hear what Ruby has to say about parenting.
And I want to remind everyone that I am watching the Mormon Stories podcast YouTube channel. They have been following this story very thoroughly.
How do you know if you are a controlling parent? What is it that you're going to look at? So we have this idea that controlling parents are parents who make their kids do something that the kids don't want to do. Did you know that a controlling parent is also a parent who doesn't expect anything from their children and allows the child to do whatever they want? That's also a controlling parent.
Yeah, I mean, so if I didn't know Ruby Franke and I saw this, I'd be like, huh? But given that we know where she's coming from, she is probably reacting or trying to get out ahead of accusations that she's a controlling parent. And so she's just in this very silly way, flipping it on its head. It's like, no, I'm not, you are, kind of a thing. I'm not a controlling parent, you are. And so I'm just wondering how she's going to twist this to make sense to herself.
Being a parent is a position of power. You have a responsibility and you have an obligation and a duty to show up being wise, being a guide, being an instructor for your child.
Yeah, that's all true, but what about that initial statement of controlling parent? What is there such a thing as a controlling parent? I'm guessing to her there isn't. Or I'm guessing that threshold is way too far in the direction of harm to children. And so this is her response to that. And cult leaders and charismatic leaders and harmful people will have this format of rhetoric where they start with a legitimate question or a question that might be relatable or a fact that might be relatable, and then they progress into their nonsense. And if you don't have the ability to decipher what they're doing and you don't have a lot of education in this area, then it's very easy to be convinced, because it's sort of a bait and switch thing where they start with something that is reasonable and that gets you into this mode of, oh, I'm listening to something that's reasonable. And then they proceed to slowly transition, or sometimes quickly transition, into their brainwashing of you, essentially. Politicians, bad actors in politics will do this as well. They'll say, like, hey, you've heard a lot about climate change lately. And yes, it's possible that CO2 emissions are going up and global averages of temperature are going up. But we really just have to ask ourselves, what is the agenda of those people who are talking about this? And let's look at this, then they identify some actual news story of a disingenuous scientist who made up some data. And then they say, and then let's look at this tweet from this liberal who wants to take down the entire oil industry or this terrorist who attacked this power station. And let's really look at what's, so you start with something that a lot of people can relate to. It's like, oh yeah, I've heard of climate change. And then you start to feed the information. And then by the end, you've basically said climate change is silly and the liberals are idiots and terrorists. And I am now going to feed you the information that I want you to adhere to, which is that oil companies are awesome, and I want you to vote for me because the oil companies are paying me. I mean, it literally is what we're going through around the world right now. So for Ruby Franke right now, she's like, controlling parent. But controlling is also this other thing. And you're thinking, oh, really? Controlling is also being passive. And you have a responsibility. It's all reasonable, right? And then what would follow this, this statement is the most reasonable thing she said this far. It's like, yeah, you do have a responsibility as a parent. Absolutely. And what do we mean by controlling? But for her, we know what that means. She is abusively controlling. Yeah, you have responsibilities to impose limits or to guide the child, to help the child understand where their rights end and other people's rights begin, kind of a thing. Yeah, you need to do all those things. But you also have a responsibility to love your children and to teach them in a way in which they learn lessons that can actually be adhered to. When you just control children and you punish them constantly, then they're basically just acting out of fear. They're not making their lunch in the morning because they've learned some lessons about responsibility or about how to make a lunch in the morning. They're making their lunch in the morning because they're terrified that they're going to be hungry and humiliated in front of all the other class mates and the teachers and on the internet. They're acting out of fear. And yeah, you've taught them a lesson to be afraid of you and to fear your retribution, like your Ramsay Bolton. Do we really think that Theon Greyjoy learned some sort of good life lesson by being tortured by Ramsay Bolton? No.
And your children are showing up saying, I won't do that. No, I don't want to. If you're in a position of power and you turn your power and give it over to the kids, that is control.
Everything she's saying, verbatim, I can get behind. I wouldn't word it that way, but some parents are harming their children by not having any sort of structure, by just letting their kids do whatever they want. In the beginning of my career, did a fair amount of work with kids and teens and parents. I don't anymore, but I did back then. And as a part of that work, I would go into homes a lot of the times, and I would just see how the family operated. It was very interesting because it was a big contrast with clients that would come into the office where they're all sort of buttoned up and on their best behavior, especially in the beginning. But when I would just show up at their house and knock on the door, a lot of the times the parents would have forgotten that they made the appointment. They'd be like, oh yeah, that's right, you're here. And the animals, the pets and the dogs we run around and the cats and which I love, by the way, but it just adds to the charm / chaos. The kids are running around and the toys and just all the chaos, just regular life, right? And one of the things that I would find sometimes pretty quickly was that the parent, for a variety of reasons, had almost no structure or very little structure. The parents or parent might almost be like just another kid in the house. And the kids just have total leeway to do whatever they want. They could be violent with their siblings. They could run across the street. They run into the kitchen and eat whatever they want. They don't do any chores. They don't clean their room. They don't do their homework. They don't go to bed on time. They eat a lot of junk food. They watch R-rated movies when they're 7 years old. They, just things that can and often do harm children, not only in putting them in danger by running across the street or diet-wise, but also they don't learn that there need to be limits. There's a lesson learned every time you establish some sort of limit for a child. The child is given an opportunity to learn some sort of lesson, hopefully. Like they have an impulse to hit their sibling, but by helping them with their emotions and by having a limit, like, no, there's no hitting in this house, that they have to learn how to refrain from hitting. They have to get to, and if you're there helping them with their anger or whatever emotion they're having, then at the end of that whole process, they learn a lesson of regulation, of how to use their words, how to notice when they have those impulses. yes, there's a lot of things that you need to do as a parent to help. And parents that don't do that are harming their children, absolutely. But what she is saying is, that example of a neglectful, harmful parent justifies being abusive to children. It's this huge leap, right? It's not like there's a middle zone between what Ruby does and what a neglecting parent does.
Just said, other than we do have a term that's called permissive parenting. So again, she's kind of coming up with her own terms. Of course, we're supposed to be guides. Of course, we're supposed to show up with wisdom. Of course, there's going to be some level of consequence or parenting styles, and they can differ as far as how you're going to, reward or have consequences or all of those things. But again, it's a flowery presentation that basically ended in severe child abuse.
Yeah, she should have her own YouTube channel. Natasha Helfer should have her own YouTube channel. She's much more concise than I am. So, yeah, absolutely.
Let's go ahead and go to the next clip about parenting, where Jodi talks about children acting out.
So many of us that are parents, it's like, I don't want to have to track them down. I don't want to have to just, take everything away from them. And it's like, you're not taking things away from them. What you're doing is you've handed them things that they're not managing. And so it's your job to make sure that the first thing they manage is themselves.
I've seen this clip before of Jodi Hildebrandt, and I'm pretty sure what she's getting at is that she would be recommending to parents in her program that when the child misbehaves, according to her, that the parents take away things, like take away their phone or their computer or their toys or their privileges or whatever, and maybe even take away their room. Like with Ruby Franke, took away her son's entire bedroom. He had to sleep in the living room for a number of months on the floor, according to him. And then so Jodi would recommend that, probably, and then her clients would either react in the moment or later on and say, like, it feels like I'm just constantly taking stuff away from the children and it doesn't feel good. Is this the right thing because the child's not doing so well, that they're getting angry at me. And then Jodi's saying, hey, here's how you look at it. You look at it as, I gave children these things, but it was temporary. It's not their things. Their cell phone isn't theirs. I'm just letting them use it for a while, and I'm just taking things back so that they can know that they have to control them. If they don't have control over their cell phones, if they don't have control over their privileges, we're going to take those away, and they have to get control of themselves. There's a lot of things I could say about this. There's a lot of different parenting practices. Can a parent who has an overall good approach to parenting, can a particular parent take away privileges, take away the phone, take away the computer? Yeah, absolutely. You can integrate that into an overall parenting plan that works for children. You can go too far with it, of course, but it is one of the things that you can do. If a child, a 14-year-old child is getting bad grades, and you notice that they're constantly on Snapchat or whatever kids are doing today, and you even see them late at night at 1 a.m, 2 a.m, under the covers on their phone, might you consider talking with them about regulating that, and possibly, if they can't control it, that for their own good, you're going to take it away, or as a disciplinary measure? Yeah, absolutely. That's not bad parenting necessarily. There's a lot of other options, but you can absolutely do that. But what I think she's getting at is that it goes, of course, way beyond that, because, of course, the allegation and what seems to be in the evidence is that eventually she's taken away so many things and taken away so many privileges that you have very young children, elementary school children, being tied up and duct taped and not given any food, not given any water. So we know how far she takes this, and it sounds like she has a way of trying to convince parents to continue to go down those roads, and maybe even convince herself that it's okay to do this sort of thing.
In today's video, we are going to be talking all about words. Now, words are literally letters that are strung together that make a sound. How do I know that that's actually what that word means? Well, I would go to the source of truth. I would go to God to know what is the meaning of this word.
So if you don't want to have a baby, then do not use your agency to engage in sexual contact. Now, I know that nobody talks about that anymore. Like nobody. I don't hear that from anyone, like abstinence. That used to be around when I was a kid, abstinence. But nobody says that anymore because everybody feels like they have a right to just do whatever they want. And then they have these consequences, these outcomes of STDs or pregnancy or rape. And they don't want to take any responsibility for their participation in it.
Oh my God. I mean, I was already irritated by what she was saying at first, but that last bit, she's saying that if you are raped, it's your fault because you chose to be sexually active. I think what she's saying is if you engage in consensual sex, then you're opening the door to being raped. And it's actually quite the opposite, Jodi. If you were following the standard of care and were up to date on the research, then you would know that, what did Luke Skywalker said? Everything you said there was wrong. So let's start from the beginning. She says that, people don't talk about abstinence anymore. Well, yeah, in the past they might have talked about abstinence, but they weren't abstaining. You can talk about abstinence, but people don't abstain. It's like telling people not to drink water. It's a basic human need to have intimacy and sex. Not everyone needs it, but most people do, and it's a compulsion that we can't control, and you shouldn't try to. You should try to cultivate relationships in which you can meet your needs, sexually, romance, intimacy, conversation. It'd be like saying to someone, you can never talk to anybody. You need to abstain from talking to people. That would be hard to do. You would maybe be able to do it for a while, especially if you've been brainwashed since you were a child. But eventually, you're going to slip up and have a conversation with someone because we have a human need to have a conversation. We have a human need, most of us, for sex. And when you have a brainwashed group of people that believe that having sex is somehow this horrible thing outside of marriage, then you get what you get. So she's saying, people don't talk about abstaining anymore. Well, yeah, I mean, people do, but at least mainstream science and good public education doesn't, because they certainly do talk about abstaining. I've taught sex ed. We talk about abstaining. We talk about the reality of abstaining. We talk about the benefits of abstaining, but we also talk about the benefits of having a consensual relationship as well. If you want to abstain, go for it. And it is the most effective way to avoid all the STIs and the pregnancies and whatnot. But to force yourself to abstain when you don't necessarily want to abstain, then you get problems. Anyway, point is that the data shows that when you have programs, sex education programs, that are only talking about abstaining and are, abstinence only education is what's called. Data shows that, and it's hard to know exactly because, correlation doesn't equal causation, but from my memory, there's a fair amount of research strongly suggesting a causal element here, that when you take a community of kids, of teenagers, and you teach abstinence-only education, you see an increase in STIs, you see an increase in childhood pregnancies, and the theory goes is that you don't give them any tools about how to navigate their needs, and so they just suppress and they say, okay, I will abstain, and that's what I'm going to do. And so they just move on with their life and say, I'm just never going to have sex. I'm a good person. I'm a pure person. And then these needs are occurring for them, but they're pushing them out, but that's shameful. I'm not going to. And then they find themselves in the backseat of a car with someone that they have a crush on, and all the needs just come pouring out, and they have no ability to manage it because they haven't been told how to manage it. And then they don't use protection because they didn't bring any, because that's sinful to have protection that admits that you're going to have sex. They might not have even had access to protection because their school or their church or their community bans that from being exposed to children, because that's child abuse to give a 17-year-old a condom. And so I'm saying that facetiously. I hope you know that it just comes bursting out, and then boom, they have an STI, they're pregnant, and then we get what we get. It's not like that doesn't happen outside of abstinence-only education, but it seems pretty clear that it is a much higher rate of that. So all that is, of course, idiocy, what she is talking about, and has been known to be idiotic for decades, by the way. It's just so weird that in 2023, people are still talking this shit. It's just so disheartening. You know, when I was young and in my 20s, we knew this was stupid, and I thought, well, surely by 2023, it'll be over and no one will be talking about this anymore. But we have politicians who are elected officials talking about this shit. It's just so disheartening. Anyway, so all that's stupid, what she's saying. And then, you know, she's rattling STIs, pregnancy, rape. It's one thing to be stupid about the stuff that we've been talking about. It's another thing to say, if you were raped, it's because you weren't abstaining from sex. I don't have to explain to you why that is not only just stupid, but abhorrent and evil. Just evil. It's immoral. What she's doing is immoral. It is immoral. It is wrong. It is potentially against, technically, the Mormon religion. I don't know. To actually suggest that someone who is victimized and harmed in that way, that it's their fault because they were sexually active in a consensual way prior to that incident. That is an immoral, evil statement. And why is it evil? Well, because I'm sure she knows, or at least she's been exposed to the data, that when people, particularly young people, are sexually assaulted, that they will blame themselves and society will blame them. And we need to do everything in our power as clinicians, Jodi, to be able to counter all of that culture and all of those internalized voices from culture. It's my fault. I shouldn't have dressed that way. Or, maybe I deserved it, or maybe this is a good thing, or whatever. All those brainwashed thoughts, we need to do everything in our power to counter that and to participate willingly in that oppression, in that harm of victims is just disgusting. It's truly disgusting.
Now, when I say rape, what I'm talking about is you engage in a sexual relationship and then you may say, stop. And the person's like, I'm not stopping. I'm going to take what I want. I'm not talking about like someone attacks you and forces you.
Oh, she's elaborating. Okay. So, yeah, just abhorrent. Just abhorrent. It's like if you're in the backseat of a car and your partner and you are kissing, and then they decide to force you to go further than you want to, then hey, that's on you. Jesus Christ. Yeah. 2023, people. 2023. When I was young in the 70s, and I thought forget about 2023. Just think about the year 2000. I thought we would be so far beyond all of the ills of society. You know, I watched Star Trek. I just thought not only would we be on multiple planets across the galaxy, but we'd have jetpacks and hovering cars, and certainly all this nonsense would be gone because science and research and experts and knowledge, all this backward shit will be flushed down the toilet. Nope, apparently not.
I'm talking about your participation. And then at some point you say, I don't want to do this anymore.
She's a licensed therapist, I want to remind everybody. I mean, right now her license has been suspended as of the time of recording this, but at this moment, she is a practicing licensed therapist for decades, and her local religious organization is funneling countless clients to her. And these are public statements she's making on the internet. She's not doing this behind closed doors. She is doing this out in the open. It's just astonishing. And it's astonishing to me, you know, what she's doing is astonishing, but even more disheartening and more astonishing is that many, many people worshiped her, not just loved her help or her philosophy, but, and I don't use worship lightly, people thought she was this guru of parenting, that she had figured out all the answers. And she was this, this oasis in a sea of secular ridiculousness. And it's just, that's pretty upsetting, because we can put Jodi Hildebrandt in jail, but what about all those parents? They're still out there. All right, well, that does it for that episode. Everyone, please take care of yourself, because you deserve it. You really, really do.